7 months into my pregnancy, Ethan Carter handed me a cup of boba tea. I took a huge, unsuspecting gulp. An agonizing burn like liquid fire instantly seared my throat. It was ghost pepper syrup. I coughed so violently that I couldn't even stand straight. The sudden, intense pressure made me lose control, and warm fluid began trickling down my thighs. My pale maternity dress was instantly ruined, damp and stained, as drops fell onto the polished tiles of the shopping mall. Amelia Rose, Ethan's little assistant, suddenly ran out from behind a pillar and threw herself into Ethan's arms. "See, I told you pregnant women have no bladder control. A few coughs and she leaks everywhere. Ethan, you lost the bet. You have to take me to the movies tonight. Besides, Clara is in such a messy state now, you probably don't even have the appetite to touch her, right?" Ethan caught her by the waist, a lazy smile on his face. "Fine, I admit defeat." Amelia leaned against Ethan's shoulder, looking at me with a sweet, mocking smile. "Let's bet again. Do you think Clara is going to cry?" Ethan turned his head to look at me. He didn't try to cover my stained dress. He didn't stop the onlookers from filming me with their phones. He just smiled and said, "I bet she will. She cares about her pride more than anything. She won't last 3 minutes." The two of them walked into the elevator, laughing and whispering, leaving me standing alone under the mocking, curious stares of the crowd. I didn't cry. I just pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Late that night, hundreds of bodyguards surrounded Amelia's apartment complex. I pressed a cold dagger against her cheek and smiled softly. "Want to make a bet, Amelia? Let's guess if my next cut will be on your pretty face, or straight through your heart." Amelia stared at the blade pressed against her cheek, trembling as she shrank back into her chair. "Clara Vance, don't do anything crazy. There are security cameras everywhere here. If you touch a single hair on my head, Ethan will never forgive you." Even now, she was still trying to use Ethan to threaten me. I pressed my wrist down slightly. Amelia screamed and shut her eyes tight. The blade scraped past her ear, cutting off a lock of her hair. "Relax," I whispered. "I always pay my debts. I'm just playing a little game of my own. Let's bet on how many cups of ghost pepper water it will take for you to cough and wet yourself." I signaled my bodyguards to open the cardboard box on the table. Inside were dozens of cups of prepared ghost pepper water. "You had your fun with me this afternoon. Now we're going to play the exact same game. Drink." Amelia clenched her teeth, refusing to open her mouth. Just as a bodyguard forced a cup toward her lips, Ethan's furious voice roared from the doorway. "Stop." He pushed past the bodyguards blocking the entrance and rushed inside. Seeing Amelia pinned to the chair, he didn't hesitate for a second. He pulled her into his arms, shielding her. "Clara, what the hell is wrong with you?" The moment Amelia saw him, her tears fell like rain. "Ethan, I was just playing a harmless prank on Clara this afternoon. But she brought all these people to corner me. She even threatened me with a knife." She pointed to the lock of hair on the floor. "If you had come any later, she would have ruined my face." Ethan stared at her for a long time, making sure she wasn't actually hurt, before finally turning his cold gaze to me. "Amelia went a bit too far this afternoon, I admit that. But did you really have to make such a big scene? You're healthy. A little coughing fit won't kill you. Amelia has a weak stomach. Drinking this stuff will actually put her in the hospital." So he remembered Amelia had a weak stomach. But he completely forgot that I was 7 months pregnant, and my doctor had repeatedly warned me to avoid anything spicy or irritating. I didn't bother arguing with him. I only asked one question. "Did you tell her about my pregnancy incontinence?" Ethan fell silent for a few seconds. "I only mentioned it casually once," he muttered. "How was I supposed to know she would turn it into a bet? When I was 3 months pregnant, I leaked for the first time because of a sudden sneeze. Back then, I had locked myself in the bathroom, too embarrassed to even open the door. Ethan had stood outside, gently comforting me for an hour. Later, he carried me to the bed and changed the sheets himself. He told me there was nothing to be ashamed of between husband and wife. He promised me, this will be our little secret. No one else will ever know." But now, even his little assistant could use my deepest embarrassment as a joke to humiliate me. Amelia hid behind his back, pretending to be innocent. "Clara, don't get the wrong idea. Ethan was just worried about your postpartum recovery, so we talked about it. I even looked up pelvic floor physical therapy for you." I looked at her coldly. Was posting that video on Snapchat also to help me recover? Amelia's face stiffened for a second, but she quickly sneered. "I only sent it to a few friends in a group chat. They were the ones who shared it online. It's not my fault." She held her phone up to my face. The video of me in the mall had already been shared tens of thousands of times. The comment section was filled with vile laughter mocking my body and my stained dress. Someone had even made a gif of my humiliated expression. Ethan glanced at the screen. "The internet has a short memory," he said dismissively. "The trend will die down in a few days, and no one will remember." He said it so easily, because he wasn't the one filmed in his most vulnerable moment. He wasn't the one being laughed at by tens of thousands of strangers online. I ordered my bodyguard to pour another cup of ghost pepper water. I won't make things difficult for her. Drink this, delete the video, and make a public apology on Instagram. Then we'll call it even. But Amelia didn't reach for the cup. Instead, she gently touched her lower abdomen. The crying, pitiful girl from seconds ago was gone, replaced by a smug, victorious look. I can't drink this. The doctor said pregnant women should avoid spicy things. I thought I had misheard her. What did you say? Amelia pulled a prenatal report from her designer bag and unfolded it in front of me. I'm pregnant. The baby is Ethan's. I stared at the medical report, completely speechless. Amelia seemed highly satisfied with my reaction. She wrapped her arm around Ethan's, intentionally pressing her belly against him. Clara, don't be mad. I never wanted to take your place as Mrs. Carter. But don't be too controlling. My baby will still need to see their father often in the future. Ethan didn't push her away. Instead, he looked down at her gently and murmured, "The doctor told you not to stand for too long. Go sit on the sofa." He helped Amelia to the couch and ordered my bodyguards to take the pepper water away. Only after making sure there was nothing in the room that could harm her did he turn his attention back to me. His tone was incredibly calm, as if we were discussing a minor business deal. Once, when I accompanied you to your prenatal checkup, Amelia wanted to play a game. She dared me to kiss her in the hospital hallway to see if you would catch us. We got carried away, and I lost control. But I never planned on divorcing you. I won't let her threaten your position as my wife. He even walked over and gently adjusted my coat for me. His touch was as warm as it had always been. But the words coming out of his mouth were ice cold. Clara, we both grew up in this upper-class circle. Which man in our circle doesn't have a few women on the side? Keeping a quiet, obedient mistress to relieve stress is completely normal. You were raised to be a perfect society wife. You should know when to make a scene and when to look the other way. I stared at him, suddenly remembering the Ethan from many years ago. Back then, Ethan hated nothing more than the so-called rules of high society. His father had kept countless mistresses outside. His mother had spent her entire life clinging to her title as Mrs. Carter, yet she didn't even get to see her husband one last time before she died. On the day of her funeral, an 18-year-old Ethan had knelt in the grief hall all night, his eyes bloodshot. The next morning, he had held my hand and promised, "Clara, I will never ever become a man like my father." When he was 22, the Carter family tried to force him into an arranged marriage with another heiress. Ethan had flipped the tea table right in front of both families' elders, grabbed my hand, and walked out of the Carter estate. Behind us, dozens of relatives roared in anger, and a fleet of luxury cars blocked the driveway. He didn't even look back. That night, the Carter family froze all his credit cards and repossessed all his properties. With only a few $100s left in his pocket, he had looked at me and laughed. What's there to be afraid of? Even without the Carter family, I can still give you the best life. And he had kept that promise. When he proposed, he rented a private island. Hundreds of drones formed my name in the night sky over the ocean. The pink diamond on my engagement ring was bought at a Geneva auction for a staggering 9-figure sum. On the eve of our wedding, he had signed a prenuptial agreement with an infidelity clause right in front of all his family elders. The agreement clearly stated, if he ever cheated or fathered a child with another woman during our marriage, all his shares in the Carter Group, his family trusts, and his offshore assets would be transferred entirely to my name. At that time, everyone tried to persuade him not to sign it. But Ethan had handed me the pen, his face glowing with absolute confidence. "Sign it, Clara. I'll never give you a chance to use it anyway." I had believed him with all my heart. So when the Carter Group's capital chain broke, I convinced my father to use the Vance family's funds to bail him out. When he was attacked by the board of directors, I handed him all of the Vance family's voting rights. The day Ethan secured his position as the sole heir of the Carter Group, he held me tight and said, "Everything I have now was given to me by you. In this life, you will be my only wife." Now he still ruled the Carter Group, but he had finally become the very monster he used to despise. Seeing that I remained silent, Ethan assumed I had finally accepted the reality. His voice softened. "Once the baby is born, I'll buy Amelia a house in another city and give her a generous allowance. She won't ever show up in front of you. You will still be Mrs. Carter, and our child will be the only legally recognized heir to the Carter fortune." Amelia leaned back on the sofa, gently caressing her stomach. "Clara, Ethan still loves you the most. I'm happy enough just having him visit me once in a while." She sounded so submissive, but the smugness in her eyes was glaring. They probably thought I would be just like Ethan's mother, swallowing all the humiliation just to keep up appearances. I smiled slightly and turned to my bodyguard. "Call the legal team in. Trigger Clause 7 of the prenuptial agreement." The moment I finished speaking, a dozen lawyers walked into the room. Leading them was Robert Davis, who handed a set of documents directly to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, Miss Rose's prenatal report is sufficient proof of your infidelity, which violates the terms of the prenuptial agreement. As of this moment, your 37% shares in the Carter Group are officially transferred to Miss Clara Vance. Furthermore, the Vance family's financial funding to the Carter Group is officially terminated. Ethan's phone immediately began to ring loudly. It was the chairman of the board. Even from a distance, I could hear the panicked roaring on the other end. Ethan, what the hell did you do? The Vance family just pulled all their investments. The bank is calling in our loans. The board is demanding an emergency meeting to suspend you immediately. Ethan gripped his phone, his face draining of all color. Clara, we've been together for so many years. Are you really going to ruin everything I've built over a stupid little mistake? I looked at him and laughed. Ethan, didn't you say you wanted to keep a mistress? I'm leaving her to you. As for the house, and the money you wanted to use to support her. I snatched the keys to his luxury penthouse right out of his hand. They are all mine. From today on, I am leaving you with absolutely nothing. I turned to walk out. Behind me, Ethan finally lost his cool, desperately calling my name. I didn't look back. At the door, I cast one last look at Amelia. Congratulations, I said. This completely broke man is all yours now. But just as I stepped over the threshold, Robert Davis called out to me. Miss Vance, wait. His tone was heavier than I had ever heard it before. We just checked the marriage registry database. There is no record of a marriage registration between you and Mr. Carter. I froze in my tracks. What do you mean? Robert glanced at Ethan, his expression grim. It means the marriage certificate you hold is fake. Mr. Carter's only legal wife from the very beginning has been Amelia Rose. I slowly turned around. The last trace of panic on Amelia's face had vanished. She pulled 2 marriage certificates from her bag and waved them at me with a triumphant grin. Clara, did you really think I was just Ethan's hidden mistress? The pathetic unregistered side piece has always been you. I stared at the date on the marriage certificates. 3 years ago, June 17th. The exact same day Ethan and I had supposedly gotten married. On that day, after we got our certificates, I had cried tears of joy in Ethan's arms. Ethan had kissed away my tears and told me, Clara, from this day on, we are legally husband and wife. But it had all been a lie. Amelia giggled, covering her mouth. Oh, by the way, I made a bet with Ethan that day too. I bet him that you trusted him so much, you wouldn't even realize the officiant he hired was a fake, and you'd never check the registry database. I told him if you found out, I would leave him forever. But if you didn't notice, he had to go to the real city hall and marry me. She flipped open the certificate. And guess what? You didn't notice a thing. While you were happily going home with your fake certificate, Ethan came to pick me up. We made it to City Hall right before they closed and registered our real marriage. I looked at Ethan. Is what she's saying true? Ethan avoided my eyes, looking guilty. It was just a bet, Clara. I didn't think things would turn out like this. It was just a bet. Because he lost a bet, he handed my rightful title of wife to Amelia. And because I trusted him blindly, I lost my entire marriage without even knowing it. Amelia patted her stomach, her smile growing sweeter by the second. Ethan even said that day that you were so easy to fool. A little hug, a quick kiss, and you'd never think to double-check. Clara, you've been a fool for 3 whole years. And now you want to use a prenuptial agreement to take his shares? Don't you find that hilarious? Robert Davis rapidly flipped through the agreement, his face turning pale. The very first clause of the prenuptial agreement stated, this agreement shall only take effect upon the date of legal marriage registration by both parties. But Ethan and I had never been legally married, which meant whether he cheated or got Amelia pregnant, the agreement was completely invalid. I couldn't touch a single share of his 37% holdings. Ethan finally looked up, adjusting his collar. The confidence returned to his eyes. Clara, it's not too late to stop this. Tell the Vance family to restore the funding and stop pressuring the board. I can overlook the fact that you broke into this apartment with a mob tonight. In the future, you can move to the suburban villa. Just focus on having the baby and stop causing trouble. I stared at him. And if I say no? Heavy, synchronized footsteps suddenly echoed in the hallway. Several police officers walked through the door. Amelia immediately threw herself into Ethan's chest, crying hysterically while pointing to her head. Officers, it's her. She broke into my home with hundreds of men, held a knife to my face, and tried to force me to drink toxic liquids. I'm pregnant. She wanted to murder me and my baby. Ethan held her tightly, looking at the police. Officer, Clara Vance has been mentally unstable lately. She caused a scene at the mall this afternoon, and now she's bringing armed men to my home. I'm genuinely terrified she will hurt my wife and our child. Wife. He could finally call Amelia his wife, openly and proudly. The officer looked at the dagger in my hand, then at the bodyguards filling the room. Miss Vance, we're going to need you to come with us to the station for questioning. The metal click of the handcuffs was loud in the small apartment. I didn't struggle. I let the officer turn me around, his grip firm but professional. I looked down at the silver cuffs around my wrists, then up at Ethan. He was still holding Amelia, his hand rubbing her shoulder in a slow, soothing motion. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He was staring at the floor, his jaw tight, his shoulders slightly hunched. Clara, he muttered, his voice barely carrying over the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Just cooperate. Don't make it harder on yourself. Amelia peeked out from behind his chest, her face still wet with tears, but her eyes were bright, gleaming with a vicious, triumphant satisfaction. Make sure she doesn't come near my baby again, officer, she whimpered. She's dangerous. I didn't say a word. I walked out of the apartment flanked by the officers, my head held high. Behind me, Robert Davis followed, his leather briefcase held tightly in his hand. As we stepped into the elevator, he leaned in, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Miss Vance, your father has already been notified. The head of the precinct is a close associate of the family. You won't spend a single minute in a cell. I know, Robert, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I'm not worried about the police. But the prenuptial agreement. Robert's brow was furrowed, his face pale. If the marriage registration was indeed falsified, the contract never technically came into effect. We cannot legally touch Ethan's shares through the infidelity clause. He played us, Clara. He played us from the very beginning. I looked out the glass window of the elevator as we descended toward the lobby. The city lights were bright, reflecting off the damp asphalt below. He thinks he played us, I murmured, a cold, hard smile spreading across my lips. But he forgot one crucial detail. What's that? If we were never legally married, I said, my eyes narrowing, then every single dollar of Vance family money he spent over the last 3 years, every corporate bailout, every personal gift, every high-end asset we purchased together, was not marital property. Robert froze, his eyes widening in sudden, profound realization. It was unsecured personal loans and gifts obtained under false pretenses. I continued, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. Specifically through identity fraud and criminal misrepresentation. He wanted to keep his 37% shares. Well, now he's going to have to use every single one of those shares just to pay back what he stole from my family. 20 minutes later, we arrived at the precinct. As Robert had promised, there was no holding cell. I was led straight into the captain's private office, where my father was already waiting. He was sitting on the leather sofa, his face a mask of cold, unyielding fury, his hands resting heavily on his gold-handled cane. The moment he saw me, he stood up, his voice thick with emotion. Clara. I'm fine, Dad, I said, letting the officer remove the handcuffs. The baby is fine. My father turned to the precinct captain, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. My daughter was assaulted in a public shopping mall this afternoon, and then she was lured into a trap by a fraudulent husband and his mistress. I want the police report finalized tonight. But more importantly, I want our legal team to initiate the clawback. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, protective pride. We are going to dismantle the Carter Group, block by block. And we are going to start with Ethan. The news of the Vance family's sudden withdrawal of funds hit the stock market. At 9 a.m. the next morning, the Carter Group share price, which had already been unstable due to the internal board disputes, plummeted by 25% in the first hour of trading. The financial channels were filled with frantic analysts predicting the immediate collapse of the Carter empire if a new backer wasn't found by the end of the week. Ethan was sitting in his executive office, his tie undone, his desk covered in empty coffee cups and frantic post-it notes from his secretary. Where is the legal team? He roared into his desk phone. Why haven't they filed the injunction against the Vance family's asset freeze? Mr. Carter, his chief legal counsel's voice came through the speaker, sounding exhausted and defeated. We can't file an injunction. The Vance Group didn't freeze your assets through a standard corporate dispute. They filed a massive, multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit for grand larceny and fraudulent inducement. Ethan froze. What? They are claiming that because your marriage to Clara Vance was legally non-existent, every single financial transaction between the Vance Group and the Carter Group over the last 3 years was obtained through systematic fraud. The lawyer explained, his voice trembling. They have submitted the fake marriage certificate and the testimony of the officiant you hired as evidence of criminal intent. The court has already approved a temporary asset freeze order on your personal holdings. Your penthouse, your luxury cars, and your private bank accounts are all locked down. The phone slipped from Ethan's grip, clattering onto the mahogany desk. He sat back in his leather chair, his face completely devoid of color. He had spent 3 years believing he was the smartest man in the room. He had thought that by keeping Amelia as his legal wife, he could have both the Vance families wealth and his own private, obedient mistress. But now, the very lie he had constructed to protect himself was the noose that was tightening around his neck. The door to his office was suddenly thrown open. Amelia marched in, holding a crying baby doll she had bought for her nursery, her face twisted in anger. Ethan, why is my credit card declined? I went to the baby boutique to buy the imported crib, and the cashier told me the account was closed. Get out, Amelia, Ethan muttered, not even looking up. What did you say? Amelia's voice rose in pitch, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan, I'm your wife. Your legal wife. You promised me we would move into the penthouse this week. You promised me I wouldn't have to live in that cramped apartment anymore. I said, get the hell out. Ethan roared, slamming his fist onto the desk, sending his coffee cups rattling to the floor. Amelia flinched, taking a step back, her face turning pale as she saw the sheer, unbridled desperation in his eyes. For the first time, she realized that the brilliant, wealthy heir she had fought so hard to steal was rapidly turning into a bankrupt, ruined man. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling. You still have your shares, right? The 37%? We can still sell them and live comfortably. The shares are locked in court, Amelia, Ethan said, his voice dropping into a hollow mocking laugh. If I sell them now, the money goes straight into the Vance Group's escrow account to pay off the fraud lawsuit. We have nothing. Amelia stood there, her hands shaking, looking at the man she had believed was her ticket to high society. The gold-plated dream was cracking, revealing the cheap, rotting wood beneath. Within 2 weeks, the reality of their bankruptcy had completely settled over Ethan and Amelia. They had been evicted from the luxury penthouse. Because the court had frozen all of Ethan's personal assets, they were forced to move into a cheap, damp, 2-bedroom apartment near the city's industrial district, the exact kind of place Amelia had spent her entire life trying to escape. The sweet, submissive mistress had vanished, replaced by a bitter, screaming wife who spent her days throwing cheap porcelain at the walls and demanding to know when the money would return. You're a failure, Ethan, Amelia shrieked one evening, her voice carrying through the thin walls of their cramped living room. I gave up my youth for you. I got pregnant for you. And now I'm living in a dump while Clara is sitting in her family's mansion, laughing at us. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey in his hand, his eyes bloodshot and vacant. Shut up, Amelia. Just shut the hell up. I won't shut up, she screamed, throwing a plastic baby bottle at his head. The doctor said I need to go to the private clinic for my 3-month checkup, but they won't even take my call because your name is blacklisted. Do you want our baby to die? Ethan slowly looked up, his face a mask of cold, unbridled resentment. In his past life, he had looked at Amelia as his stress reliever, the wild, fun girl who didn't demand anything from him compared to the serious, high society Clara. But now she was the exact same suffocating, screaming weight that was dragging him into the dirt. Our baby, Ethan muttered, a dark, cynical smile playing on his lips. Amelia, let's be honest. Is this baby even mine? Amelia froze, her face instantly turning pale. What are you talking about? I saw the security logs from the office, Amelia, Ethan said, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. During the 3 months before you got pregnant, you were spending a lot of time in the archival room with my junior assistant, Marcus. The same Marcus who resigned and left the city the week you announced your pregnancy. You're paranoid, she stammered, her voice shaking violently as she stepped back. I loved you. I only did the bet because I wanted to be with you. You did the bet because you wanted the Carter Group's money, Ethan said, his voice dropping into a freezing, absolute certainty. But now there is no money. There is only debt. And since we are legally married, Amelia, you are legally liable for half of my personal liabilities. The mention of liabilities made Amelia's jaw drop. She had fought so hard, played so many disgusting games, and spent 3 years pretending to be his loyal shadow just to secure the title of Mrs. Carter. And now, that very title was the golden shackle that was going to drag her into permanent financial ruin. She let out a choked, pathetic cry, turned around, and locked herself in the small bedroom, sobbing hysterically as the sound of the rain outside washed over the gray concrete walls of their prison. While they were rotting in the industrial district, my world was filled with a quiet, beautiful light. I spent my final month of pregnancy at my family's private estate in the countryside. The air was clean, the gardens were filled with blooming white roses, and my mother spent her days knitting small, delicate baby clothes while my father read his newspapers by the fireplace. There were no cameras. There were no online comments. With the help of my father's legal and public relations teams, the video of me at the shopping mall had been completely scrubbed from the internet. The accounts that had shared it were hit with massive, coordinated copyright and defamation lawsuits, forcing them to delete the files and issue public, groveling apologies. On a quiet Tuesday morning in November, my water broke. I was taken to the private maternity wing of the Vance Medical Center, accompanied by my parents and my brother Leo. The delivery was long and exhausting, but there was no panic, no coldness, and no betrayal. At 4 p.m., a loud, healthy cry echoed through the delivery room. The nurse cleaned her up and gently laid her against my chest. She was tiny, with a soft tuft of dark hair and clear, intelligent eyes that looked out at the world with a quiet, peaceful curiosity. "She's beautiful, Clara," my mother whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face as she leaned over the bed. "She looks exactly like you." "Her name is Valerie," I said softly, my fingers gently tracing her tiny cheek. "Valerie Vance. She would not carry the Carter name. She would not carry the legacy of a liar and a cheat. She would grow up under the protection of the Vance family, surrounded by love, respect, and absolute security." The next morning, while I was resting in my private suite, the door was quietly pushed open. I expected my father, but instead Ethan walked into the room. He looked unrecognizable. He had lost 20 pounds, his tailored gray suit was wrinkled and covered in dust, and his eyes were hollow, dark, and filled with a wild, desperate panic. He looked like a man who had walked through a war zone just to reach this room. Before he could even take a step toward my bed, my father and two burly security guards stepped out from the adjacent lounge, blocking his path. "Ethan," my father said, his voice hard as iron, "you have exactly 10 seconds to leave this room before I have the guards break your legs." "Clara, please," Ethan sobbed, ignoring my father completely, his eyes locked on the tiny bassinet beside my bed. "Let me see her. She's my daughter. I'm her father." "You are a stranger, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet, even and entirely devoid of any emotion. "And you have no legal right to this child. The birth certificate has already been filed. The father's name is left blank." "Clara, I'm sorry. I was crazy. I was stupid." Ethan fell to his knees on the polished floor, his hands reaching out to clutch the edge of my blanket, his face covered in tears. "Amelia's baby. It isn't mine. The DNA test came back yesterday. It was Marcus's. She lied to me, Clara. She played me." A faint, cold laugh escaped my throat. "I know," I said. "I'm the one who sent Marcus's address to your legal team last week." Ethan froze, his eyes widening in pure, agonizing shock. You knew?" "I knew from the very beginning, Ethan," I said, looking down at him with a distant, cold pity. "I let you marry her because I wanted to make sure that when you fell, there was no one left to catch you. You threw away a woman who would have given you her family's entire fortune, just to marry a fraud who wanted nothing but your name." I looked at the security guards. "Take him out." "Clara. No. Please. I love you. I've always loved you," Ethan screamed as the guards grabbed his arms, dragging him backward out of the suite. He thrashed against their grip, his polished shoes scuffing the floor, his face a messy mix of tears and ruin. "Clara." The heavy door was shut, cutting off his cries, and the room fell into a beautiful, quiet peace once more. Valerie didn't even wake up. She slept on, her breathing slow and steady, her tiny hand curled tightly around my finger. The final court hearing for the Carter Group's fraud and asset clawback took place in the Grand Hall of the Provincial High Court. The room was packed with the city's corporate elite, reporters and photographers, all waiting to see the final downfall of the once proud Ethan Carter. Ethan sat at the defense table, looking hollow, his eyes fixed on the mahogany wood, completely motionless. Amelia sat beside him, wearing a cheap, dark dress, her face covered in a thick layer of makeup to hide her pale, terrified expression. My legal team, led by Robert Davis, stood at the prosecution table, calm, organized, and armed with a mountain of financial and identity documents. The judge cleared his throat, his gavel striking the wooden block with a loud, final crack. After reviewing the extensive evidence of identity falsification, criminal misrepresentation, and systematic financial fraud, the judge announced, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "This court finds the defendant, Ethan Carter, guilty on all counts of grand larceny and fraudulent inducement. The prenuptial agreement is hereby declared null and void, and the Carter Group's 37% shares currently held by the defendant are officially repossessed and transferred to the Vance Group as restitution for the $42 million in misappropriated funds. Furthermore, the defendant is sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary." The courtroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Ethan didn't move. He sat there, his head dropping slowly onto his hands, a quiet, broken sob escaping his chest as the bailiff stepped forward to click the heavy handcuffs around his wrists. Amelia stood up, her face turning completely white as she realized she was now legally tied to his massive, unpaid restitution debts. No. This is a mistake. I'm the victim here. I didn't know he was broke, she screamed, trying to run toward the exit. But two female officers quickly blocked her path, grabbing her arms and leading her out of the room to be processed for her own complicity in the identity fraud. I stood up from my seat in the front row, wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. I looked at the chaotic scene, then at my father, who was standing beside me, a soft, proud smile on his face. It's over, Clara, my father said, gently squeezing my shoulder. Let's go. Home. Yes, Dad, I said. Let's go. We walked out of the courtroom, bypassing the swarming reporters, and stepped into the warm, bright sunshine of the courtyard. The wind was cool, rustling the golden leaves of the ginkgo trees along the street. I took a deep, clean breath, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely, beautifully free. I drove back to our countryside estate, walked into the sun-drenched nursery, and scooped Valerie into my arms. She looked up at me, her tiny mouth forming a sweet, soft smile as she clutched my silk collar. The tragedy of my past was finally erased. The monsters had destroyed themselves in the very trap of their own greed. And as I looked out at the wide, green gardens of my home, I knew that our new life was finally ours to live, free of the rules, free of the bets, and filled with a quiet, beautiful light that would never fade.